And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Charles Davis, who's VP of Engineering for FullArmor. How's it going, Charles? Thanks for joining. Much appreciated.
Hi, David. Happy to be here.
So I looked at your background, and you've always been in tech, right? So you've always started for different roles, and then you spent some time in the cybersecurity side, but when it wasn't even called cybersecurity, right? So why don't we get started there? And I ask you, how did you get started?
Absolutely. So I guess it was in the mid 80s when I got my first computer, and I was hooked. And lived.
Do you remember what kind of computer it was?
It was a Commodore 64 hooked up to an old 13-inch TV.
And I don't know if I had one. Most likely. I even remember the Sinclair Spectrum, which I think was the predecessor to that.
Yeah.
And then there was a Commodore 64, but the Commodore 64 was the the iconic home computer where everybody started to have it, and you can start programming on it as well, right? Is that correct?
It was the gateway into the
gateway drug.
Yeah, exactly. So I was kind of hooked at that point. But I kind of diverged away until I moved to Austin to go to college. And at that point, I started working at Dell in the I think it was '89, Dell Computers.
Wow.
And I got back into the computer industry. And of course, at that point, I would say a 2600 / Usenet IRC kid, and really got back into the security space at that point, and from there I ended up getting to go work at IBM. I was recruited to go work in what was a new team there in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it was the Internet and Network Security Group and the TCP/IP group at IBM.
Wow!
And so that was really, I guess that was in the mid '90s, about '94. And so I ended up there. We were working on IBM's first firewall product.
Wow.
IBM's first key management protocol. The first VPN. We were doing, which is network address translation now, but it was a security feature at the time. And so we were doing some really cool stuff, but being in security, that was before red teaming even existed. And so penetration testing and red teaming was all part of the QA in the engineering team. And that's where I found myself. And I had an awesome mentor in that organization at IBM who allowed me to continue being involved in the security black hat kind of arena, and sent me to conferences. I'd already been involved with DEF CON and 2600 and the different hacker conferences that were going on at that point in time. And so they allowed me, not even allowed me, they would pay to send me to go basically collect the latest intelligence, or back then it was collect the latest wares. What are the latest techniques and the latest software that was being used for the latest hacking tools, and bring those back and work with the engineering organization at IBM to build countermeasures. And that's really where I kind of found myself spending a lot of time in the cybersecurity space before it was even called cybersecurity.
What do you think? This is so interesting. What do you think was the trigger behind IBM creating kind of a new division? I mean, back then it wasn't the forefront of a lot of organizations to begin with, right? Cybersecurity or internet or information security or IT, IT security, whatever you call it, wasn't even on the radar screen of a lot of companies, let alone something that they will go out and spend money on. And yet, IBM is such an organization that they don't move unless it's like a big boat, right? So they don't move unless there's a real demand, or like they can see that they can make quite a bit of money out of it. So,
sure.
What do you think that was the trigger to creating that kind of a new division in IBM at that time?
Our organization was the need to protect, and our biggest customers were government agencies, but to protect government assets, government networks. And so we went through a series of, regulatory compliance audits and all of those things for our engineering practices. But I think probably the driver was this was when the connected world, the internet, was really starting to expand. Like I said, at that point, HTTP was just starting to really emerge. This was pre-Netscape even.
Wow.
And at that point, we were starting to see all of these networks connecting together, IBM being one of them. And the groups that I had been associated with or following for quite some time. And like I said, Usenet was a big part of the early, a lot of information that kind of, in my personal opinion, that kind of bred the beginning of the what you would consider the script kiddies and the hacker community today.
Right.
Is people finding ways to, and it started to cause problems that needed to be solved, real world business problems.
Right. Do you think there was maybe potentially an incident? I see a lot of times, companies go out and spend money as being proactive or actually reactive, so to speak. So do you think there was maybe a government incident related to like cybersecurity that, triggered an investment on their end, and therefore, IBM followed suit and created that division?
I will say yes. What specifically the incident might have been, I don't know, but I do know that when I was recruited to go work at IBM, I was also contacted by DO. The emergence of Cyber Command was starting to be built. And I know that there were a lot of concerns about what was going to happen in this new world. I mean, obviously, the connected networks, the internet came out of DARPA, DoD organization, and I think the writing was on the wall, and I think that was probably triggered by some events. Like I said, I started out living in a naval base town, which allowed me access to a bulletin board system that gave me access to interconnected computers.
Yeah, it's super interesting. The early days were very different as well because they were, because it wasn't a board issue at all, and the mindset wasn't there, and it's the things we work on right now are intangibles and are tough to explain, but people kind of get the fact that they need security.
Yeah.
And they understand it, and maybe they can relate to some of the endpoint devices they use, like the smartphones and so on, and they hear or they read the news and so on. But back in the day, none of that existed. So you had to explain if, like the underlying, elements from ground zero. It's almost like, explaining people why they need a sports car when they're still really taking the subway, which is super tough. Today, somebody's already has a, kind of a, maybe a sedan, and then, the leap from a sedan to, or a family car to a sports car is not that wide. But back in the day, it's like, people walked, and then you had to sell them, they have to work with them to explain to them why they need a sports car, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you say that, because I was just reading on one of the hacker forums that I'm a member of, and they were posting old newspaper articles, and it was newspaper articles from the, I guess, 80s, the early 90s, people saying that the internet was just a fad and it was going to die out, that this new technology is really is going to add no value and it's going to die out, kind of thing.
Yeah, the question was, how do we make money? I think that they people were still questioning, the whole, I guess the outcome of the internet. How can you monetize it? There was a question there.
Yep. Yeah, and like I said, I was working at Dell very early on, and there at that point, monetizing it wasn't really monetizing the internet, but being able to monetize it was selling hardware, selling computers, and then software was a need to have in the back office type scenario, in corporate networks. But even then, it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. But it seems like the mid 90s was really the tipping point. And once all the networks started becoming interconnected, and then you had things like AOL that opened up the internet to the average people, and they started getting on and realizing that they could participate in a community that spanned across the country, and in some cases, in many cases across the world, was kind of a, we've all heard the way it's explained, but it was the Wild West. People were staking their claim and going out there and exploring this new territory, this new place, and it was an interesting time. It was really a time to learn and a time to grow.
Yeah, and that tipping point, it just expanded over time. It seems like there was milestones that you could almost put the finger on. Like one that comes to mind is the Target breach, or some of the big ones that happened.
Yeah.
The OPM breach, and so on. So they really created that impact around awareness for security at executive level, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, we see a lot of those, and a lot of those, just in the last 10 years, it's been amazing. But the last 5 years, even, we've seen such dramatic advancements in the technology and the way cyber attacks are happening, and the technology growth coming out of that. But really, and you said it, the impact it's having on businesses, the impact it has on individuals. I mean, I've personally, even in the cybersecurity space, been personally affected by some of the big breaches that have occurred. And those are the things that motivate me personally. Is I research all of the big ones, look into what happened, why it happened, and it goes back to my roots of, okay, what were the countermeasures that could have prevented this? Do they exist today? If they don't, what can I do with my team to defense to this type of attack? Because it's always the cat and mouse game in the cybersecurity space, and has been ever since I first got involved.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned specifically that you went and investigated. Like, I don't think we do this enough in the industry as a lessons learned. After incidents, and I think a lot of people just gloss over it, and they hear the headline, oh, it was a misconfigured S3 bucket, or or default password, or third-party supply chain hack, but they don't actually get into the details, and the devil is always in the details in terms of what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And the complexity, as you mentioned, is ever growing. So we're investing, so much money in technology to protect enterprise, but yet, I think the attack surface is growing, and we're still very vulnerable if we were 15, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Well, and that's that's part of the fun. That's part of the what I enjoy about doing the research and looking at these breaches is, we often hear, at least in the most of the media, what the end result was, but how did the bad guys get there? With the one of the most recent, the T-Mobile breach, which was, really not the latest, the prior one, but how did their customer database get breached? We know that the customer database got breached from all the news reports and all the disclosures, but you have to dig in to find out how they get there. And a lot of these breaches happen because of techniques that have been around since I first got into the industry. And, that's things like doing port scans, network scans, going through and looking for open listening ports and exploits. And that's one thing that hasn't really changed significantly in the cybersecurity space or even in the software space over the last 30 years is the way we deliver technology has changed. We've had significant advancements in the way we consume technology, the hardware, the software, but a lot of the underlying techniques and challenges come from areas where we haven't made as many advances, and that's things like everything on the internet is bound to an open listening port, and that means all that communication happens through open listening ports on endpoints, computers, IoT devices, and 9 times out of 10, that open listening port is going to be an opportunity for a bad actor to make their way into an internal network, or make their way into a device and then begin their lateral movement and start doing their intelligence gathering. And I think there are a lot of people out there that know that they can exploit those areas that have not really changed significally in the last 30 plus years.
Yeah, and I guess inherently the internet was supposed to be open, right? So it's an open communication network basically, and I think that's the main problem. So in these open ports, despite the fact that there are various different ways for organizations to protect themselves beginning from firewalls is the first thing that comes to mind, but there's application firewalls, there's the this behavior analysis engines and network network segmentations and virtual network. I mean, there's just so much of that stuff going on, and yet there's still open ports, I guess, that are have the ability to communicate to the outside world without anybody looking at it, right?
Yeah. The challenges are, every application that's listening on an open listening port has an open port, and you can have tons of these open listening ports, which means you've got tons of applications running. It can be tens, it can be dozens. I don't want to say hundreds, that's probably an over exaggeration on a single server, but not on a single network by any stretch of the imagination. And these IT administrators that are responsible for that's a job that I really, I admire their the work that they do, but that's certainly not something I would ever want to take on because that seems to be a big attack vector that opens a lot of opportunities for exploit. Is unpatched. We've heard it, dozens of times over the last couple of years. Unpatched servers being a point of exploit. Most recently over the New Year's holiday weekend with Log4j. It's that was an absolute nightmare for all of these people who are responsible for doing their doing the maintenance and patch management and things like that on these networks. So it's a tough problem to overcome as technology continues to advance and new applications and SaaS applications and cloud and being able to rely on perimeter security is becoming one of those things that you can't just count on, that if your perimeter security is in place, your firewall and your VPN, then you're safe.
Interesting. So you decided as a practitioner to contribute and decide to maybe solve some of the issues that you've come across, throughout your career. And you ended up at FullArmor. Maybe you can give us an idea of what FullArmor does and what's your role there, and how do you contribute to the, it's one thing to declare it as a problem. It's a whole different ball game to help solve it.
Well, absolutely. So FullArmor has been around for quite a while, 20 plus years. I met the FullArmor folks about now I guess about 20 years ago. And I'd kind of been lured away from the security space a little bit with the excitement of the startup industry. But I had ended up back in security software at a company that was acquiring some technology from FullArmor. And FullArmor has been around doing security software since back in the DOS days. So I was on the acquiring side of technology from them, you at the time, now Micro Focus. And we acquired this technology from FullArmor. And over the years following that, I found myself really interested in the work that they were doing and had the opportunity to go work for them. Not coincidentally, because my wife works for them as well and runs the QA team there. So I ended up at FullArmor, and I've been at FullArmor now for about 15 years. And what we do is we look at these problems in the market, and sometimes they are pure security, and sometimes security is an aspect of it. But we look at the problems emerging in the space, and then we look at, okay, what are, like going back to my IBM days, what are some things are there products that are solving these problems today? And if there's not, is there something we can do to help solve those problems? And oftentimes we find that there's something we could do to address some of the newer emerging threats. So for me, what I do is I'm the VP of engineering. So I work with our engineering team. We have an amazing team of technicians and engineers. And very often what we'll do is we'll look at a problem in the space. We will do the analysis and look and see if there is, who's trying to solve this problem, how are they trying to solve the problem, and does it make a lot of sense? Is it going to really solve the problem, or is it going to obfuscate the problem in another way? And so what we do is and more often than not, what I'll do is I'll do a bunch of research. I'll look for other technologies. I'll even look at previous patents, prior art, see what people are doing, or what technologies are more problems in the space. And if there's not something that already has a foothold in the space, I'll start working on a product idea, a product pitch with my executive team. And then once we think we've got something that makes sense, I take it to my engineering team and we brainstorm, and all of us put our heads together, and we'll have some heated debates about it. And some people will poke holes in the ideas, and other people will fill those holes. And eventually the way our team works is, as a group, we come up with a potential product idea. And we nail out the architecture, and then we end up doing a proof of concept to see if it's real. Can we actually do it? And if it's something that we believe we can actually do, that makes sense, then we go to the executive team and say, okay, we think we've got this problem solved, and they will shop it around to some of our advisors and get ideas. And if it makes sense, we build it out and bring it to market.
It's interesting. So you work on developing new product lines, for the company, and part of that requires extensive research to see if there's issues that are unsolved, and then you can review what's out there, and then you figure out if there's a market for it, and then developing is not easy. So it's one thing to develop, you also have to maintain, and then you have to create. That's what people don't realize, how complex it is. So you can build it and it can work out great, but then you have to support it. You have to create documentation for it. You have to, deployment models, work with enterprise. I mean, there's a QA, and there's a million different things, and then go to market, GA. It's the complexity is endless, right? So you really have to, and you can't really make mistakes, in the sense that it's once the sale is shipped, the boat is, if shipped, it's really hard to get it back to the harbor, because there's a lot at stake, right? Is that a correct statement?
Absolutely. Yeah. Once the architecture is baked and the product's released, it's real hard to pull it back and redesign it because you made a mistake, which is where we as a team, and I will say this, I've been with FullArmor for almost 15 years, and I'm the newest person on the engineering team. So most of the people on the team I've worked with, obviously, for 15 years or more, but a lot of the people on the team I've worked with at prior companies as well. So we really understand each other the way we work. We're a mature group of engineers, and we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we really rely on each other to design and bring products to market as a team, which is how we've been able to do what we do, is leveraging each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Charles, I have to tell you that it's atypical to what you just described to what's going on in the marketplace right now. From conversation I overheard, at least from people of the different generations, maybe some of the newer generations that come to the job market, what they have in mind is to work for a company for a year, get some experience, maybe work for a company with a brand name, and then jump ship, getting like double the salary, getting the sign-up bonus, and do this iteratively over and over again until they get to maybe the peak of the earnings. And but what you're describing now is you're describing a cohesive group of people that are driving to the same mission for quite some time. So so the question is here, there's got to be some advantage to knowing your peers and working with them for so long, and doing that so well.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. In fact, I will say I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it weren't for my team. I can say that wholeheartedly. We've, in the last, I want to say probably 5 years, gotten 7 patents for our new technology we brought to market to solve some of these problems that I've been talking about. And it is all a team effort. Our team, the way we work together, like I said, we've got different strengths and weaknesses, and we know each other well enough that we know that if there's a specific problem that I can't solve or that another person can't solve, we know who on the team is the right person to bring it to. And we've been, like I said, we've been working together for a very long time. So we know each other's work styles. We're all distributed across the company. It's interesting because we've been doing remote work from home for 15 years. Wow. So we were doing this long before COVID and before it was common practice. So there's that understanding that we know each other. We've worked with each other for a very long time. Most of us have worked together at prior companies. And we bring kind of a level of maturity and understanding of each other's work styles, and know that we can rely on each other.
And I hope that's part of your messaging as a company, because since you sell security, I would love to know that the company that I deal with is stable, mature, have everything together, and it's been around for a long time. And not like just riding those waves like a roller coaster, and is here today, going tomorrow, or get acquired, and getting all those, because that's the stability is something to be said, especially when you're dealing with security and large enterprise, right?
Absolutely, yes. So we have been around for a while. Obviously, we've worked together for a long time. We've definitely ridden the waves, the highs and lows. But that's part of the experience that we've had. We've done that together as a team, and it really goes back to our leadership. I mean, we've got a great leadership team. Our 3 founders, who started the company back in the 80s, doing security around DOS, the DOS operating system, really create an environment that makes it a place that. We're like a family. I can honestly say that about the team. We've worked together for so long. We know each other so well. We go on company trips together when we have a win, and spend time together. And I genuinely care, and I know our founders feel this way about the team as well. But genuinely care about the team's well-being, their family's well-being, and that we have a good work balance with our life and our families, and allowing everybody to work from home for this long, and being able to trust each other really helps build that kind of environment, which is unique.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's unique and it's fantastic, and it's probably something that should be replicated. So let me ask you this: So what exciting new products that you've recently brought to market? Maybe let's talk about that. How you came across the problem,
Sure.
and that process, and then what's unique about your offering, and maybe describe the problem that you specifically solve for enterprise.
Well, so I told you I started out, in the cybersecurity industry at IBM, and that was back in the Unix days. And then Linux emerged, but what we've seen is there's been a reluctance for a focus on Linux security over the last probably longer, but 10 years, because everybody felt like Linux was an inherently security operating system. But what we've seen over the last 8 years ish is Linux security has fallen behind, and a lot of the APT groups, nation state hackers are exploiting Linux machines more often. So we started looking at the Linux space, and we worked on a product, brought it to market, licensed it to a partner of ours, and this was around securing and enforcing security policy on Linux machines using group policy, which is kind of an interesting concept, using Windows group policy to secure, enforce, monitor, and harden Linux machines in an enterprise. Well, we were doing this across the hybrid cloud because the cloud is an emerging market as well. And the product is really interesting in what it does, because it'll even override root's ability to edit configuration files. So we are enforcing security policy on Linux, even when someone has elevated permissions. And that was an interesting thing. But what we started to find was, as we brought this product to market, and it's been really an interesting product to work with and bring to market. But so that was a product or two back. But the cloud part. So every time I'd bring up a new Linux box in the cloud, what I found was within less than 30 minutes, that machine was under attack. And it was brute force attack, and it was just nonstop. So every morning I would wake up, look at my Linux boxes in my cloud environments, all of the major cloud environments, under brute force attack, log files, lots of security alerts, and I was dealing with, and you probably know the term alert fatigue for people that work in a SaaS, checking to make sure these boxes hadn't been exploited. Do I need to bring them down and rebuild them? But I needed them to be out on the public internet for the purposes of testing and building out this other product. So it became really frustrating, and it became so frustrating that it became a point of motivation to look at how can I keep these boxes online? How can I continue to have full access to them, but how can I protect them? And so our AD bridging product to harden and secure these Linux boxes led to the next product, the most recent patent that we've gotten, and the most recent product that we brought to market, which is, and this goes back to what I was saying about the open listening ports. And this is a product where it was born out of frustration and a need to protect these boxes and reduce risk and save time. And that was a product that we call Shepherd. And a lot of people, when we're talking to customers and doing demos, we've had a lot of people say, I don't believe you're doing this. I just want to see the demo because I need to see for myself. What we did was we developed a technology and then patented it that will allow us to turn off the open listening ports, but still maintain full access. And it started with SSH on Linux. So if you know how SSH works, which I'm sure you do, you got the open listening SSH port. You try to harden it as much as you can. Firewall rules, your SSH conf file, who can access, who can't, but the port is still there, open and listening.
Yeah, you have brute force attack detection.
Exactly.
Long password. I mean, you have all kinds of stuff to do. You even can change the port number for obfuscation reasons and so on, right?
None of those things were working for us. Still under attack unless I can change it to the most obscure high order port, still under attack within less than 30 minutes.
So let's kind of dissect that. So what is that? Is that there's bots that crawling the web to detect these, like, and I'm assuming that why Linux boxes, or why like specifically SSH port? Because is that something that just the more vulnerable, so that therefore the state actors or hackers are looking for that specific open ports vulnerability? For why is that so quick? 30 minutes sounds like almost impossible.
Well, so yeah, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Palo Alto Labs came out with a report that said, with all the bots and with the technology that has advanced so far in computing power, that you can do a complete scan for specific ports across the internet on the open cloud for specific listening ports in like 7 minutes now. Rodan, the website, you can go there and it shows almost 23 million open listening SSHD daemons on the public facing internet today. So it's real easy for these nation state hackers or the APT groups or even the bots to do the scan of the public IPs and find open listening ports on these machines. And once you have the open listening port, now you can query that port for what daemon's running on it. Once you know what service is running on that, now you can start looking at the list of exploits. You can even get the version of the daemon that's running on that open listening port. So you can go back and look and see, okay, has this been patched or not? And if not, are there any known CVEs against this version of the daemon listening on that open port? The bad actors have become very sophisticated and very efficient at what they do.
I think that also the tools available to them are getting more sophisticated. So maybe maybe the bad actors have, they've improved because the tools that they're using, just like we are, have improved, right?
That and they're very well funded.
Yep.
So,
unlike we are.
I'm sorry.
Unlike us.
Well, that comes and goes, but yeah, especially the nation state and the APT groups. But if you're a ransomware group, your whole mission is to find those ways in so you can get into the network and plant your wares and exploit them for money. So it is a big problem, and it's something that and you asked specifically about SSH. Well, in the Linux world, for remote management, for being able to remotely access those machines, SSH is the de facto mechanism for being able to do that. And so, like I said, almost 23 million today machines running on the public-facing internet with SSH running and listening on an open port.
So how do you fix that? You mentioned that it was something very specific that you do that it's almost unbelievable when you tell this to potential clients and they ask specifically to see it. What is that specifically? So
when I went to my team with this problem and told them what I wanted to do, I'll be honest, a couple of them told me I was crazy and that it was a dumb idea because there was no way to do it. And then we dug in and I shared with them more what I was thinking and this was not this last holiday season, but it was the year before. So 2020. So a handful of the team and I basically spent the holiday season working on the proof of concept for how we would do this. And as we came out of the holiday season, so needless to say, we didn't really take much time off, but it was a fun project to work on. But we came out of it going, realizing we can do this. This is something that, we've got a solution to it. We can completely disable SSH on a Linux machine, close off the open listening port, but still make a request and have full SSH access to that machine. And we do that in a number of ways. But what we're ultimately doing is we're disabling SSH and making it a on-demand service that when you request a connection, you get a dial back from SSH rather than it having an open listening port waiting for an incoming connection. And we're able to do this in a way that we don't open up another port. In a fully hardened environment with our Shepherd product, I can shut off every open listening port, yet still be able to access that machine. And that was really the technology that we built. And then if I want to use SSH, it'll spin up SSH for a one-time use session, and then at the end of that session, it'll spin it back down. And we built in for bad actors. And I will say that all of this architecture and design really came from a problem that we were experiencing on a daily basis. But it also came from my research and an article that I published on the Cloud Snooper bug or exploit, and the way they were hiding their exploit and using a RATC2 architecture to be able to initiate a session to that machine and have it be completely obfuscated. So we learned from some nation state hackers that had some really sophisticated and at the time new technology for a fairly new exploit, and leveraged what we learned from that to be able to use that as a product for countermeasures against similar attacks.
So Charles, speaking to CISOs in space, it's all about risk mitigation, where to allocate the funds to, for the best bang for the buck to increase the organization's risk at the highest level for the least amount of money or resources, right?
Yep.
So this particular issue, who within the organization cares about this, and how do you engage with customers? Do customers know that they need this? Are they fully aware of this problem? Because they have a slew. It's almost like a slew of issues that they have to deal with on a regular basis, and this is just one of them. So how do you make sure that this is an area where they want to, fix it now, and they're fully aware that this is a critical issue that they need to go ahead and spend money on?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because, again, we're somewhat on the forefront with this technology. The technology's only been released for about 4 months or so. We also do RDP, not just SSH, so it becomes a little bit more broad and more interesting, and we can also obfuscate all other applications across it as well. So all open listening ports, and a lot of our customers we've got to help them understand why this is important. More so for us, what we're finding is that the market and the cyber criminals are doing a really good job of making that known for us. And I'll give you the example. It was, I want to say 2 weeks after we launched Shepherd with the SSH capability, the T-Mobile hack occurred. And sure enough, the T-Mobile hack was a brute force attack against an open SSH port on their customer database. And so that was a perfect example of a massive breach that cost a company a lot of money and a lot of really, there was damage in multiple ways. I happen to be a victim of that exploit because I'm a T-Mobile customer and my customer data was in that database. But so as these exploits continue to happen, that just gives us more real world examples of why this is so critical. And every CISO, CEO, CTO out there has, these similar concerns about what the impact of a major breach would be, whether it's a ransomware attack or whether it's stolen customer data. So really, right now, and I'm not on the sales side, so that's not my area of expertise. But when I'm brought in to have conversations with these people, with the customers, it's explaining to them, here's why we built this product. Here's why it's important. Here's how we would mitigate these kinds of attacks and prevent them. And we've got some other technology built into the product for being able to monitor every session. So it's the auditing, the compliance, the removal of the attack surface. So that's really what we tell people is, attack surface management is important. But if you've got known exploits or known vulnerabilities, normal ports that are always under attack, RDP, SSH, database ports, completely close them off and remove that attack surface. Don't just manage it, but remove it, and monitor all activity going forward from those ports. I mean, I talk about a number of big breaches. Even a phishing attack can result in a breach like this. I mean, if you look at the JP Morgan Chase breach a few years back, that was a Linux Unix administrator who fell for a phishing scam and had his SSH key stolen. And then those SSH keys were used to exploit the internal systems and exfiltrate data over months and months. And with a product like Shepherd, you remove that attack surface, you close off those ports, and those stolen credentials or those SSH keys that have gotten out into the wild are no longer useful. They become ineffective with our product. So we're able to.
Why is that? I'm curious. Why is these stolen credentials for the SSH keys no longer effective?
Well, so whether it's credentials or SSH keys, you have to connect to that open listening port. Mm-hmm. And that's when you are prompted for your credentials, or you have your key exchange and access is granted. But with the way we're approaching security in this space, those open ports are no longer there. So there's no port to connect to. And those SSH keys or those stolen credentials become useless at that point. Mm-hmm. The way we've done it is we've got a point of ingress into the system where you have to authenticate. And once you authenticate, then you are asking for a session to call you back for access to that remote machine. You have your key exchange and your credentials at that point, but at that point you're going through multiple levels of authentication. So you're being authenticated at every point along the way before you're granted access to that remote machine. And once you are granted access to that machine, that's the only point of ingress into that machine because there's no open listening port. So all of the SSH keys that have gotten out in the wild would only be good through the point of ingress for our system. And at that point, what we do is every session gets recorded. So in the event that our system was exploited by a bad actor, everything they did at that point would be recorded, and we have built-in kill switches so you can remotely monitor and remotely kill a session. You can automate that via your SIM system. So you could have something like ArcSight have a rule that says if someone tries to zip files or move data off that machine, call the remote kill switch immediately. And all of those session recordings are stored offline, not on the endpoint. So if a bad actor was to make it into the system and gain access to an endpoint, the session's being recorded, they can't delete the recording. And if they attempt to tamper with the system, that session would be killed immediately and a notification and alert would be created.
So first I say, Charles, that you answered the tough questions really, really well.
Well, thank you.
Then I asked the tough questions. So because that's what possibly, probably what potential clients want to know as well. So I'm kind of replicating that here. So I appreciate you answering it quite well. So let me ask you this question: what does a quote unquote deployment looks like? Because the enterprise always asks about, okay, how does it play well with my existing infrastructure? How do I deploy it company wide? What does that look like? What's the level of effort of that and management? Can I deploy in a cloud environment? So on and so on. Maybe you can give us an overview of that.
Sure. So the answer is it's not a SaaS solution. Being a security purist, I hesitate to go down the SaaS path just because the SaaS provider becomes the attack surface, the attack vector. So by keeping it distributed and each customer owns their own environment, that spreads out the possibility of a centralized point for an attack. A deployment looks pretty much however a customer wants it. So it can be deployed in any of the cloud environments, the server component, or it can be deployed on-prem. So you do have and we use some common technologies, some open source technologies. So our server is a really lightweight management console that is also an ingress bastion host. So it's already a hardened box, but no session can be initiated from that. That would normally be the primary attack surface. So we hardened it and made it so that a session, it's not like a proxy. You can't log on to it and initiate a session to an endpoint. We have our agents, which reside on all the endpoints under management, but then we have a user control tool. And that control tool also distributes the attack surface across all of your users. And then we use the standard RBAC kind of role-based access control and grouping so that people only have access to the machines they're supposed to have access to. And then based on that architecture, now you've got the system in place to make the request to our underlying intellectual property, the technology that's patented, to initiate that request for a session that will then call you back. And an interesting note where people really get excited when we're doing demos is when I show them that I've got a session to a remote endpoint, no matter where it resides. But then I do a port scan on that machine and show that even though I'm on that machine actively working, there are still no open listening ports, so the machine is still hardened while I'm actively working on it from a remote
So it's completely stealthy to anybody who's scanning that machine.
Exactly.
That's incredible, right?
And all the communication is encrypted, so it's FIPS compliant. So a lot of the stuff that you would expect us to, having dealt with government agencies over time, all of the things you would expect to have as far as the encryption layers, the integration points for third-party identity providers or privileged access management products. So it's really a cool product. It was a lot of fun it's been a lot of fun to work on.
So tell me, who do you, in your mind, is the kind of the perfect fit for this? Because not everybody is, and I always tell this, it's not one size fit all for, especially in technology, because the complexity. So there's certain type of organizations, maybe with certain type of technology stack, that this would be a perfect fit. In your mind, just from your experience, who would that be?
I will tell you that the early adopters, the early interest we're getting are from, I would say the DoD complex, government agencies have really been the initial people that have really understood it and seen the need. The next would be large enterprises that have critical systems that they have to protect. So, we talked about some of the major breaches that have occurred. We have had people who still rely a lot on their perimeter security, and so they'll say we've got VPN and we've got firewalls, so we're not concerned. So, I guess the best answer, the short answer is anybody who is seriously looking to embrace zero trust. So it falls really well within the zero trust model of, don't trust your users, don't trust any of the devices on the network, don't trust that the bad actors aren't already in your environment. Lock it down and monitor everything, and access is only granted when access is needed to people who are allowed to have that access, and then monitor everything as it's happening. So that's probably the hierarchy of what we're seeing of where it fits the best today, who's embracing it the quickest right now, and where it fits in within probably mid to large enterprises.
Absolutely, Charles. So this was fascinating. I love innovation in the space. I think this whole cybersecurity space is being moved by practitioners like yourself that are, out there in the forefront, thinking how they can make this more secure, better every day, and not just talking about it, but having actionable, steps towards the goal, having a secure world. So I appreciate that, and absolutely love the story behind it. So, what's the easiest way? And we'll probably do this again. Love to dive deeper into maybe some other sections, and then we'll talk a bit more about this. But before we part ways, what's the easiest way to reach you for more in-depth review of the technology? Just reach out to you in particular, for consultation, just mentorship, whatever the case may be. What's the easiest way for people to reach you?
The FullArmor.com. So FullArmor.com. And our index page is the Shepherd product page. You can drill in and see the other products that I mentioned. But all of the contact information is there on the page. Of course, I can be reached if someone had questions, LinkedIn and all of the usual. But through the FullArmor webpage is probably the quickest and easiest.
Perfect. Charles Davis, has been a real pleasure hosting you today. Much appreciated. I hope that one day I'll be able to host you in maybe New York City area. If you ever travel this way, maybe some of the financial customers, there's a lot around here.
Yep.
And until then, thank you again for spending the time. And until then, everybody, thanks for joining in, and be safe out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Take care.